And we're going to talk a little bit about your future. Who would not want to place a bet on exactly what job you'll be in 12 months? Yeah, because you don't know, do you? And you're here hoping it's going to be a great one. But we are living in a world of increasingly uncertain times. I think you've heard that more and more and more, but there are some very specific ways that that's true. We're going to try to share some ideas now that will be skills and attitudes that you can use throughout not only this year, but hopefully throughout life, so that you can have what life is really meant to be: fulfilling, enjoyable, special, and above all, contributory. Most of you are here in mind, body, and spirit. But my question is, where will you be in 10 years' time? Some of you will still be here in Nashville because, let's face it, this is a great place to live. Some of you will be someplace far away. Some of you may be in a completely different country. Who knows? So in 10 years' time, how old will you be? Well, most of you will be in your 30s. And you're thinking, oh boy, that's kind of impossibly old. Well, what about in 20 years' time? Oh my. 20 years' time, how old will you be? 40. Now, I do work with young people, and so often I'll say, I have a question. How old is old? And without meaning to, they'll start saying, 30. 30's like old. I have a sister who's 30. She's just dull and boring. She's out of it. But 40, now you're starting to think, oh my, that's like old, old, old. Where will you be? You could be very mobile. Where will you be when you hit the half-century mark? Difficult for people in your generation to even imagine that. Where will you be? You may not even be in the world. Because if we can get Matt Damon back, we can probably get you back. So you may be living someplace that is incredibly far away. Because this is, of course, a university, we have to have at least one equation. And although the symbol of C stands for the speed of light in a vacuum, it also means what? Dig into your math. Well, C means constant. Delta means, yeah, there you go. That's okay. So what is this equation telling us? Yeah, the only constant is that nothing is constant. And that as time goes on, change is simply going to accelerate. You all are, again, what are called the I generation. You grew up digitally connected. And what they call the digital universe, which is the amount of stored information on servers, or what we now call the cloud, is actually increasing at 40% per year. That means the total amount of, first of all, what we used to call kilobytes, which you've never even heard of, and now we're talking about petabytes and all the rest of that, is doubling faster than every 2 years. So let's do just a couple of quick examples. How many of you have got a telephone that will take pictures? And you're looking at me like I'm an idiot. And you're saying, well, duh, Dan. Well, let me ask you this question. Think about that statement to somebody from a different generation. A telephone that takes pictures. What if I were a time traveler from the 60s? In fact, I am a time traveler from the 60s. And I were to show up here and go, oh, whoa, man. Whoa, this is awesome. Where am I? And you said, dude, you're at Vanderbilt. And I go, whoa, when is this? And you said, this is 2017. And I said, no way. And you say, yeah, how about you? And I said, I'm from like the 60s. Really? Let me take a picture of you with my phone. What would that sound like to a time traveler from the 60s? And I go, yeah, right. Next, you're going to call me on your camera. Because it's impossible for you to imagine a world where you couldn't take a picture with a phone. So how many of you on your phone have the ability to back up your phones somehow, to iCloud or something else, right? Okay. Who's got, they think, maybe as many as 1,000 images on your phone? And now you're laughing, saying, Dan, I got 1,000 images of my lunch from yesterday. What are you talking about? So let's say that in this room of 15 people, each of you only backed up 1,000 images. That would be how many? 15,000 images that are up there in the cloud. If we take the greater Vanderbilt community, which with all the employees, faculty, and staff, there's probably 40,000 people in this community, and if each one just uploaded 1,000 of those photos to the cloud, then we would have 400,000 images. If we take the 1.5 million people in greater Nashville and each one uploaded 1,000, we would have 1.5 billion images. And if we took the 3+ billion people in the world that have a phone that can take pictures and they all backed up 1,000 images, we got 3 trillion of those in the cloud, which would mean if the atmospheric conditions were ever exactly right, it'd be raining selfies. It'd just be pouring out of that cloud. And this is only images. And you know you have many more than that backed up, don't you? Who here knows somebody that spends quite a bit of time on YouTube? Nobody in this room, but you all have friends, right? It's been estimated that the amount of new content uploaded weekly in YouTube would require 100 years to view. That's a lot of content, and it is only accelerating. And so who can keep up with all this information? The answer is no single individual can. And it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. The world is changing in terms of its dimensions. Right now there's a very, very hot spot in the Korean Peninsula. There's a lot of words that are flashing back and forth. Sometimes those words become war. We hope it doesn't happen in this case. But interestingly enough, since the year 1990, 32 new nations were established on the earth. 32 new nations. And it is continuing to happen even at an accelerating rate. What happened last year with our allies across the pond? A very unexpected outcome. And that Britain decided we're going to leave the European Union. This is something that was never predicted in any of the opinion polls, and yet it is rocking and rolling what is actually the world's largest economy, which is the European Union. And so it's amazing what an impact that is happening, and it will continue to. In business, this can certainly happen. Who here has ever heard of a company called Netscape? Okay, do you know what they're famous for?
I know it's something to do with the internet, but I don't know.
Okay, great. Well, you know more than most people. Netscape was a company that created the very first internet browser. Before Netscape came out with what they called Netscape Navigator, you could get into the internet if you were an academic, a scholar, a government official, a military person, but it was mostly lines of text. And Mark Andreessen and his buddies developed Netscape Navigator so that you could actually have what's called a graphical user interface to get all this information. So what that meant is sometime around 1994 or 1995, for the first time, you could open your computer and see what the weather is outside. Before that, you had to open the window to see what the weather is outside. But because of this, a whole world opened up to people. And Netscape had more than 90% market share. And when you begin to study markets and market share, you will grow to understand that 90% just about never happens. And when it does, it is dominant and powerful. But here we are about 20 years later, and only one person has even heard of Netscape and no real idea of what they've done. So how many of you instead use Safari when you browse the net? Who uses Google Chrome? Anybody use Firefox? Nobody uses Internet Explorer. But at one time, Netscape had the dominant share. It doesn't anymore. Things can change really quickly. The number one company in its industry worldwide about 18 months ago was this company. It was respected, it was applauded, it was appreciated, and now it is derided because of the fraud that they committed with emissions. So things can happen very, very quickly in business where nothing really can be depended upon there. And then entire industries can change. Does anybody know what that device is? I know some people in the back of the room that probably do.
Is that a credit card thing?
No, but that's an interesting guess. Credit card thing, okay? This is what's called a slide rule. A slide rule is a calculating device. And that plastic bit here, it has a thin line on it. The thin line is called a cursor. Now you're saying, no it didn't, Dan. A cursor is a blinking thing on my computer screen. No, it's a cursor. And by moving these scales in a certain way and lining up the cursor, you can do 34 different kinds of mathematical calculations with this. You can do all of the trig functions, you can do natural logs, you can do logarithms, you can do square roots, you can do cube roots. It's incredibly rapid, amazingly precise. You can go to multiple significant digits in calculation. And you notice that it comes with a holster. And what you're looking at is my high school graduation present from my parents when I got out of high school. I did wear it on my belt. So when I walked on the campus at Harvard, and I said, yo. And we'd have slide rule races. And one day I turned to my friend Mark in physics class and I said, hey Mark, what's that thing in your hand? He said, it's called a Texas Instruments calculator. And I said, it's a fad, it'll never last. And you're all laughing and saying, oh, that's kind of funny. But the fact of the matter is, the slide rule industry was the way that people calculated. It was the only way people understood to calculate. And it was wiped out in a quick flood of technology. This really has an impact on you for career planning. How many of you know people that work in what is called IT, tech? Well, interestingly enough, what that generally means are internet-based businesses or e-commerce businesses, which have only existed in any practical sense for less than 25 years. About 50% of the jobs that will exist in 20 years are estimated to be in industries that have not yet been invented. So how do you prepare for something that hasn't even been invented yet? It has a big impact on career planning. So the question you may be asking yourself is, what in the world can I do about all this? Am I going to be a leaf caught in the stream, or is there anything we can do? Well, I've got a couple of ideas for you. First of all, I'd recommend you get to know the C.I.A. Now, not the one you're thinking of. They already know everything about you. But instead, it's a convenient way to think about the issues that you will face in life. There are some things that we can absolutely what? Control. So work with me here for just a second. What are some things in your daily existence that you can fully and completely control?
Food.
Food, okay? How much you eat, what you eat, when you eat, yes. And it dominates our thoughts much of the day, but we can learn to control those, okay? What else, even more elementary than that?
When you wake up and you sleep.
When we wake up, and how we wake up. I believe, for example, that it was a college engineering student that invented the snooze alarm. The snooze alarm is a diabolical device that ensures that you go through the pain of waking up multiple times every morning. And how many of you know people that the night before calculate how many iterations of the snooze alarm they can actually afford before they really have to get up? It's an amazing process. Sometimes people get up in the morning and it's just a quick rebound right back into that bed. If the weather's off, forget about it. So when we get up, when we go to bed, we can control that. What we eat, how much we eat, what we drink, how much we drink. What else can we control in a day?
What we wear.
What we wear. Mm-hmm. What else? A couple of things, big ones.
What we do.
What we do. Do we show up in class? Do we show up in our right mind? Do we show up paying attention? In other words, effort. The amount of effort we put forth is something we can fully control. Nobody else can control that except ourselves. What else involving interpersonal relations? Can we control other people? Well, that's debatable. We've got a big fella here. If there is a small enough human and you have a good grip, you can control them as long as your grip holds out. But those little people are slippery. You know, they get away and suddenly you've lost your ability to control that person. So we cannot control others. But in interpersonal relationships, we've talked a lot this morning about communication. What are some things we can control?
Who we interact with.
How we interact with, who we interact with, what we say. Can we influence others by the things we say? Oh my gosh, absolutely we can. If we form a habit of saying, it's great to see you today. How was your weekend? It's so much better than saying, don't you wish it weren't Monday? For the power of our words impacts how other people feel. If we learn to be good finders and we notice things that people do well and say, hey, I want to point out something you do really well that I don't know if you're aware of, that really empowers people. By the same token, if we say, I've been making a list of your faults. Do you have a couple hours? That impacts people too. So although we cannot control others, we can control what we say to others. So our effort, what we consume, all of those things, it's important, but it's not a huge list. There's a much bigger list of things that are in the I category. These are things we can't control, but we can in fact influence. What's the hugest arena we can influence, although we can't control? Other people, absolutely. Do you want a couple of tips on how to influence your professors? Okay, here's how to influence professors negatively. Now, Steve's supposed to go, la, 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 while I'm doing this. If you zone out and spend time in some other media than what's called for in the class, you will influence your professors in not a good way. If, on the other hand, you take notes in this manner, well, although you think, well, that's a little bit over the top, I can tell you from having done a lot of lectures, it will be a dramatic contrast to the average person. When the professor ever says, does anyone have any questions? Now, you remember from undergraduate, that was a death question. And so under threat of peer pressure, no one would ever ask a question because that would prolong the lecture. Or if there was a question, do you know what the most commonly asked question is? Will this be on the exam? That was the most commonly asked question universally. So when they say, do you have any questions, it might be useful to snake your hand up in the air and say, yes, I do have a question, and make sure that it's relevant and on target, because you will influence your professors, because that's a really powerful thing. Now sometimes when I say, what can we control, people say, I can control my attitude. How many of you think you can control your attitude? Good. If you can, you're actually better than I am. It was only a few months ago, I was driving up I-65 to go to downtown Nashville, and I felt this bump in the back of my car. A guy had hit me going on the interstate. He changed lanes while looking at his phone. He hit the back of my car while on the interstate, checking his phone, for crying out loud. And so I turned around and I started shaking my fist, and I went, what are you doing? And then I said, oh shoot, I teach this stuff. So, although I always thought I could control my attitude, there is this little gland in the middle of our brain called the amygdala. It's the center of primitive response emotions, and it gets hijacked by stuff. But what we can learn to influence is our attitude. And let me share with you a couple of ways we can influence attitude. One of the best ways to influence our attitude is by our own bodily posture. I'll give you an example. A YouTube video that you should watch if you haven't already is by Amy Cuddy, and it's called Fake It Till You Become It. Fake it till you become it. Amy Cuddy is a psychologist, so they test everything. And she actually tested whether or not people, by altering their body language, could increase their self-confidence. And she did it the way psychologists do, with saliva swabs, where they would measure hormones and chemicals before and after an event. If you want to be more confident, it takes exactly 2 minutes. First of all, adopt what you might call the Wonder Woman posture. Before you walk into a room, stand this posture, stand tall, stand strong, be as large as you can be for 2 minutes. Your body will actually release testosterone, which increases confidence. If you are in a chair situation, get as large as you can in the chair. Lean back in a power posture. You will increase confidence. If you want to increase cortisol, which leads to all kinds of health issues, problems, stroke, and premature death, get as small as you can. Sit like this. This requires about 2 minutes, and the body will release noticeable amounts of cortisol, which make us feel vulnerable, timid, shy. I can't do it. If you want to feel sadder, you're already sad, walk slowly, slump shoulders, and listen to Adele. Someone like you. But if you want to feel better, stand up taller, walk 25% faster, and listen to The Temptations, good music from Motown era. Because physicality definitely affects our attitudes. Another way to control our attitude is through something called self-talk. Self-talk. How many of you believe we're always talking to ourselves? Unfortunately, we are. We can't help it. I gave a lecture one time in the UK, and this guy says, I don't buy it. And I said, before you said that, did you think it? And he said, yes. And I said, well, there you go. In other words, we cannot avoid talking to ourselves. But what we can learn how to do is how to manage the self-talk. And that doesn't mean that we look ourselves in the mirror in famous Guy Smalley way and say, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. It's not what I'm talking about. What I am saying is that when we make a mistake, be forgiving of ourselves. I screwed that up. What I learned from that is the following. Instead of wallowing in the first part of the statement. So self-talk can help rescue us when we're in a tough situation. We can prepare for situations by simply thinking them through and reminding ourselves of something fundamental in human relations called breathing. If we breathe several times a minute, it's amazing how it increases our lifespan. But it also impacts our attitude in a really big way. But there's a large number of things in the world that we can neither control nor influence, and we just need to accept. What are some examples of things like that?
The weather.
The weather. The weather. Perfect example. You remember reading some Mark Twain stuff? Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, etc. He had a neighbor that said, you know, Sam, everybody complains about the weather. Nobody ever does anything about it. And isn't it really true? You planned an outing, and all of a sudden it was supposed to be sunny, and it's not sunny. And it's like, whoa! Well, you know something? There are things in life that we benefit from complaining about, and there's most things that really aren't. But who here knows people that spend more emotional energy on things they just ought to accept than they do on the C and the I? And many people that get caught up in very bad situations, it's because instead of saying, I can't change this for now, let me focus on what I can. And that's a real wisdom in life. Now, the good thing about that is if we work on what we can control and what we can influence, eventually the things we just need to accept become less important. They don't dominate us as much. And when it becomes powerful enough, you literally can change the world because you've increased your ability in what you can control and what you can influence. And that becomes powerful.